Have you ever had that moment when you know, with absolute certainty, that your life is about to change forever? When every heartbeat seems to whisper, run, hide, survive? When the hidden door creaked open before me, revealing a corridor shrouded in shadows, time seemed to stop. My fingers trembled against the brass handle, still warm from my desperate grip, as my heart thundered so violently I feared it might echo through Ravenscourt Palace's ancient halls. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed the quarter hour, each toll reverberating through stone and wood like a warning. 3 weeks as a palace maid, and already I'd stumbled upon something that would either save or destroy me. But perhaps I should start at the beginning if I can keep my hand steady enough to tell it. My name is Jane Mitchell, and until yesterday, I was just another servant in these hallowed halls. Now I'm a suspect, a thief in their eyes, though the weight of the accusation feels far heavier than the missing sapphire necklace they claim I've stolen. Have you ever felt the sensation of your world crumbling, piece by piece, like a sandcastle caught in the rising tide? That terrible moment when you realize everything you've worked for might disappear in an instant. It began on a Tuesday morning, as ordinary as any other. The palace halls were silent save for the gentle whisper of my cloth against the mahogany wainscoting and the occasional distant creak of centuries-old timber settling. My muscles ached pleasantly from the familiar motion back and forth as dawn's first light spilled through the tall windows. Dust motes danced like tiny stars in the golden beams, and the air held that peculiar stillness that comes before the world fully wakes. A stillness that, looking back now, felt more like the calm before a storm. The gentle scratch of my cleaning cloth against wood was the only sound in the sovereign's gallery when Mrs. Harrison appeared like a specter at the far end of the hall. Even from a distance, my skin prickled with warning, that ancient instinct that tells prey when a predator is near. Her usually pristine posture was rigid, her thin lips pressed into a bloodless line. Somewhere above us, floorboards groaned, and my heart skipped a beat. Have you ever seen someone approach and known, deep in your bones, that they carried life-altering news? Jane, she called, her voice sharp enough to slice through the morning silence. Come with me immediately. My legs felt like lead as I followed her through the maze of corridors, my rubber-soled shoes squeaking traitorously against the polished floors. Each portrait we passed, stern-faced monarchs and their gilt frames, seemed to watch our progress with silent judgment. Their eyes followed us, and I could have sworn I heard whispers trailing in our wake. Mrs. Harrison's heels clicked against the marble like a countdown, each step bringing me closer to something I couldn't yet name but instinctively dreaded. Would I walk these halls again as a free woman, or was this my last morning in Ravenscourt? The office she led me to was small, tucked away in a corner of the palace I'd never seen before. 2 men in dark suits waited inside, one seated behind a heavy oak desk, the other standing by the window, his back to us as he gazed out at the morning mist shrouding the palace gardens. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken accusations, and somewhere in the walls, pipes rattled ominously. Miss Mitchell, the seated man said, not bothering with introductions. His voice carried the weight of authority, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Are you aware that the crown's heritage sapphire necklace is missing from the royal collection? The question hit me like a physical blow. My mouth went dry, and for a moment, the room seemed to tilt sideways. My pulse roared in my ears like a distant storm. Missing, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Stolen, the man by the window corrected, turning to face me. His eyes were the color of steel, and just as warm. Last night, between midnight and 4 a.m., cold sweat trickled down my spine as I rushed to respond. I was home, I said quickly, the words tumbling out. I left at 11, just like always. I take the train, there are cameras, we know your schedule, Miss Mitchell. The seated man's voice cut through my protests like a blade through silk. What interests us is how your fingerprints came to be on the inside of the display case. Have you ever felt the floor disappear beneath your feet? That's how it felt in that moment, as if I were falling through space while remaining perfectly still. Outside, a raven's harsh cry pierced the morning silence, making me flinch. The questioning lasted hours in that stuffy office, going over the same ground again and again until my answers began to sound false even to my own ears. By the time they let me leave, with strict instructions not to leave Ravensshire, my shirt was damp with sweat and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. What price would I pay for truth I didn't even know? I fled to the staff washroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, my reflection looked alien pale skin, dark circles under wide, frightened eyes. Water dripped from my chin, each drop echoing in the porcelain sink like a ticking clock. That's when I heard it. Voices on the other side of the door, speaking in those hushed tones that carry secrets. Poor thing, one voice said. Though I suppose it was inevitable. What do you mean? Well, you know what happened to the last girl who worked her section, don't you? Sarah something or other, Sarah Blackwood? The one who had the accident. Accident, a bitter laugh. That's what they called it, yes. But she knew too much, if you ask me. Started asking questions about things that weren't her business. Next thing you know, the voices faded, leaving me frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Sarah Blackwood. The name stirred something in my memory, a story I'd half heard during my first week, quickly hushed when others noticed me listening. How many secrets could one palace hold, and how many lives had they claimed? What would you do if you knew you were being framed, but had no way to prove it? I spent the rest of that day watching and listening with new awareness. Every shadow seemed deeper, every whispered conversation more sinister. The very air felt charged with unspoken threats. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. The way certain staff members exchanged glances when passing in corridors, how conversations would stop abruptly when the wrong person approached, the subtle hierarchy that existed beyond official titles and positions. As my shift ended, I took a risk. Instead of heading straight to the staff exit, I doubled back to the Sovereign's gallery. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat as I waited for Mr. Peters, the security guard, to complete his rounds. 7 minutes, that's all I had. Would it be enough time to uncover the truth, or just enough to seal my fate? The gallery felt different in the gathering dusk, as if the shadows held secrets of their own. My fingers trembled as they traced the wooden panels near the missing necklace's display case. That's when I felt it, a slight unevenness in the grain, a barely perceptible seam. For a moment, the silence was absolute, as if the palace itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. When I pressed the panel, the hidden door swung open with that fateful creak. The sound echoed through the empty gallery like a warning, and my stomach lurched as if I'd missed a step going downstairs. Standing in that doorway, I faced more than just a choice. I faced two versions of my future self. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but my feet remained rooted, as if the palace itself was daring me to uncover its truth. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably another message from the investigators. The blue light caught something on the floor of the passage. A small scrap of paper, its edge just visible in the beam. My throat tightened as I realized someone else had been here before me. Was this what Sarah had found before her accident? What price would you be willing to pay for the truth? How far would you go to clear your name? I took a deep breath, switched on my phone's flashlight, and stepped through the doorway. The panel swung shut behind me with a soft click that sounded terrifyingly final. The darkness ahead seemed to swallow my flashlight beam, but there was no turning back now. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint sound of footsteps, or was it just my imagination? As I bent to pick up that scrap of paper, my fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I had no idea that what I was about to uncover would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The paper felt fragile, ancient between my fingers, and something about it made my skin crawl. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. If these first steps into Ravenscourt's shadows have captured your imagination, stay with me. The secrets we're about to uncover will change everything you thought you knew about power, loyalty, and the price of truth. What dark mysteries await in the depths of Ravenscourt Palace? Subscribe now to join me as we unravel the threads of this royal conspiracy, one dangerous revelation at a time. Have you ever felt the weight of centuries pressing down on you? As I stood in that hidden passage, the scrap of paper trembling between my fingers, I could almost hear the whispers of countless secrets that had been buried within these walls. The air was thick with dust and the musty scent of forgotten time, making each breath feel like a struggle against history itself. My phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness ahead, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The stone walls loomed close on either side, their rough surfaces cool and slightly damp to the touch. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped with a steady, echoing rhythm, a liquid clock counting down to. What? I unfolded the scrap of paper with shaking hands, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it might give me away to whatever or whoever lurked in the shadows. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. Esbjerg, Emerald Room, midnight. Truth about the Raven's Eye, Esbjerg, Sarah Blackwood? My breath caught in my throat. Was this a clue to her fate or a warning of my own? The Emerald Room, I knew it by reputation, a chamber reserved for the most elite gatherings, its walls adorned with priceless jade and malachite. But what was the Raven's Eye? And how did it connect to the missing necklace and to me? A sudden creak from behind made me whirl around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the stone walls. Nothing but shadows. Was it just the settling of ancient timbers, or something more sinister? The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I realized, in this maze of secret passages, I might not be alone. Focus, Jane, I whispered to myself, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud in the oppressive silence. One step at a time, I pressed on, each footstep echoing softly despite my best efforts at stealth. The passage twisted and turned, leading deeper into the heart of Ravenscourt Palace. How vast was this hidden network? How many other secrets lay buried in its labyrinthine depths? After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I came to a junction. 3 paths stretched before me, each as dark and foreboding as the last. Which way would lead me to answers, and which to ruin? As I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, a faint sound reached my ears, voices, muffled but growing clearer. I quickly switched off my flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. My heart raced as I pressed myself against the damp stone wall, straining to listen. 2 voices, one male and one female, their words becoming clearer as they approached. Can't keep this hidden forever, the woman was saying, her tone urgent. If she starts digging, she won't, the man interrupted, his voice cold and familiar. With a jolt, I recognized it as belonging to the man who had questioned me earlier. We'll make sure of that, just like we did with Blackwood. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. What had they done to Sarah, and what were they planning for me? And the necklace? The woman asked. A necessary sacrifice, the man replied. The Raven's Eye is far more valuable. Once we have it, their voices faded as they moved past my hiding spot and down one of the other passages. When I was sure they were gone, I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My mind raced with questions. What was the connection between the missing necklace and this mysterious Raven's Eye? And how deep did this conspiracy go? I knew I should turn back, report what I'd heard to someone, but to whom? If the man questioning me was involved, who could I trust? And would anyone believe the word of a suspected thief? No, I realized with a sinking feeling. I was on my own. Taking a deep breath, I switched my flashlight back on and chose the path the voices had come from. If they had been leaving somewhere, perhaps that's where I'd find answers. The passage eventually led to a small, circular chamber. As my light swept across the room, something glinted in the center, a circular stone set into the floor, engraved with the image of a raven. Its eye was an empty socket, as if something had been removed. The Raven's Eye, I breathed, pieces of the puzzle starting to click into place. As I knelt to examine the stone more closely, my elbow brushed against a protruding brick in the wall. There was a soft click, and a section of the wall swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. With trembling hands, I opened it, my eyes widening as I read the first entry. 1887 The Raven's Eye has been secured. Its power must never fall into the wrong hands. The fate of the monarchy and perhaps the world depends on it. What had I stumbled into? A centuries-old secret that people were still willing to kill for. The sound of approaching footsteps jolted me from my thoughts. I quickly pocketed the journal and scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. But which way was out? In my haste to explore, I'd lost track of the path I'd taken. "Who's there?" a gruff voice called out. The beam of a flashlight swept into the chamber, and I pressed myself into a shadowy corner, hardly daring to breathe. "Mr. Peters," the security guard, stepped into view, his flashlight probing the darkness. "I know someone's here," he growled. "Come out now, and maybe we can sort this out without involving the authorities." My mind raced. Should I reveal myself? Try to explain? Or would that only seal my fate? As if in answer, the man's radio crackled to life. "Peters, report. Any sign of the intruder?" "Negative," he replied after a moment's hesitation, his eyes scanning the room one last time. Must have been a false alarm. Heading back to my post, as his footsteps receded, I let out a shaky breath. Had he seen me and chosen to stay silent? Or had luck simply been on my side? Either way, I couldn't stay here. With one last glance at the Raven Stone, I slipped back into the passage, my mind whirling with everything I discovered. By some miracle, I managed to find my way back to the hidden door I'd entered through. As I emerged into the Sovereign's gallery, the first light of dawn was starting to filter through the windows. Had I really been in those passages all night? I made my way back to the staff quarters on autopilot, my body exhausted but my mind racing. The weight of the journal in my pocket felt like it might burn right through the fabric. As I collapsed onto my small bed, I pulled out the journal and the scrap of paper, staring at them as if they might vanish at any moment. What was I supposed to do now? Go to the police? But with what evidence? A cryptic note, a stolen journal, and a wild tale about secret passages and centuries-old conspiracies. No, I realized with a sinking feeling. I was in far too deep to back out now. Whatever the Raven's Eye was, whatever had happened to Sarah Blackwood, I was now a part of it, and the only way out was through. As exhaustion finally overcame me and I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one question echoed in my mind. How far would I go to uncover the truth, and would I recognize myself when it was all over? The mysteries of Ravenscourt Palace are only beginning to unravel. What secrets does the ancient journal hold? Who can Jane trust in a world where even the walls have eyes and ears? And what price will she ultimately pay for the truth? Don't miss the next thrilling installment as we delve deeper into the heart of this royal conspiracy. Subscribe now to ensure you don't miss a single shocking revelation. Have you ever woken up and, for a blissful moment, forgotten the weight of your troubles? That luxury wasn't afforded to me as my eyes snapped open, the events of the previous night crashing over me like a tidal wave. The journal lay heavy against my chest where I'd fallen asleep clutching it, its presence both a comfort and a curse. Sunlight streamed through the small window of my staff quarters, painting patterns on the worn floorboards. How could the world seem so normal when everything had changed? I sat up, wincing at the stiffness in my muscles from hours spent crawling through secret passages. The distant chime of the palace clock reminded me that I had a cover to maintain, a job to do, appearance of normalcy to uphold. But how could I go about my day, polishing silver and dusting priceless artifacts, knowing what I now knew? The missing necklace, the Raven's Eye, Sarah Blackwood's fate, it all swirled in my mind like a tempest. And at the eye of that storm, a question that chilled me to my core. How long before they came for me? I hid the journal beneath my mattress, my heart pounding as if someone might burst in at any moment. Then, with trembling hands, I donned my uniform and stepped out into the corridor. The familiar bustle of the palace staff going about their morning routines felt surreal, like actors on a stage. Did any of them know what lay hidden behind these walls? How many were complicit, and how many were as blind as I had been just yesterday? Jane, Mrs. Harrison's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. You're late. The blue drawing room needs attending to immediately. I mumbled an apology and hurried off, grateful for the mundane task to occupy my hands, if not my mind. As I worked, I couldn't help but see the palace with new eyes. Every painting seemed to hide a secret door, every whispered conversation between staff members a potential conspiracy. Midway through polishing a particularly ornate mirror, I caught sight of a familiar face reflected behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized him, the man from the hidden passage, the one who had spoken so coldly about dealing with me as they had with Sarah Blackwood. He was deep in conversation with one of the senior butlers, his expression grave. As if sensing my gaze, he looked up, our eyes meeting in the mirror. Did he know? Could he see the truth written on my face? I quickly averted my gaze, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure he must hear it. When I dared to look again, he was gone, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined the knowing glint in his eye. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety and forced normalcy. Every creak of a floorboard, every hushed conversation set my nerves on edge. By the time my shift ended, I felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap at the slightest touch. As I made my way back to my quarters, a hand grabbed my arm, pulling me into an alcove. I opened my mouth to scream, but another hand clamped over it, muffling the sound. Quiet, unless you want to get us both killed, a voice hissed in my ear. The hands released me, and I spun around to face my assailant. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and lines of worry etched deep around her eyes. It took me a moment to place her Anna, one of the senior maids who had been at Ravenscourt for decades. You've seen it, haven't you? She asked, her eyes searching mine. The hidden passages, the Raven's Eye. I hesitated, unsure whether to trust her, but something in her expression, fear mixed with a desperate hope, made me nod. She closed her eyes briefly, as if my confirmation was both expected and dreaded. Then you're in danger, girl. More danger than you can imagine. What do you know about it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. About Sarah Blackwood? Anna's face paled at the mention of Sarah's name. Sarah was my friend, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She discovered the truth, or part of it. And she broke off, shaking her head. We don't have much time. Meet me in the East Wing storage room at midnight. And whatever you do, trust no one. Before I could ask any more questions, she slipped away, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. The East Wing storage room on the opposite side of the palace from the Emerald Room mentioned in the note. Was it a trap, or my only chance at answers? As midnight approached, I lay fully clothed on my bed, every sense straining for any sound of approach. The journal pressed against my side where I'd hidden it in an inside pocket of my jacket. Its weight felt like an anchor, grounding me in the midst of this storm of secrets and lies. At 11:45, I slipped out of my room, my soft-soled shoes silent on the carpeted hallways. The palace at night was a different world. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and every portrait seemed to watch my progress with knowing eyes. I had almost reached the East Wing when I heard footsteps, multiple sets, approaching fast. Panic surged through me as I looked around frantically for a hiding place. There, a tapestry depicting some long-ago battle. I ducked behind it, pressing myself against the wall and hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps grew closer, and with them, voices. Sure about this? A woman was saying, her tone anxious. We have no choice, came the reply, and I recognized the cold voice of the man from the passage. The girl knows too much. We'll make it look like an accident, just like with Blackwood. My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. And Anna? The woman asked. Loose ends, the man said dismissively. We'll deal with them both tonight. The footsteps faded, but I remained frozen in place, my mind reeling. They were going to kill me and Anna. I had to warn her, had to get out of the palace. But how? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone, intending to call for help. But who could I trust? As I stared at the screen, a notification caught my eye, a news alert about the missing necklace. The story was everywhere now, with speculation running wild about the thief's identity. That's when an idea struck me. It was risky, perhaps suicidal, but it might be my only chance. I took a deep breath and dialed a number. Ravensshire Police, a voice answered. How may I direct your call? My name is Jane Mitchell, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm calling to turn myself in for the theft of the Crown's heritage sapphire necklace from Ravenscourt Palace. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Miss Mitchell, are you aware of the seriousness of this confession? Yes, I replied, but there's more. I have evidence of a conspiracy within the palace murder cover-ups. I need protection, and I'll only speak to the chief inspector directly. As I gave them my location, I could only hope I was doing the right thing. The sound of approaching sirens soon filled the air, and I stepped out from behind the tapestry, my hands raised. Within minutes, the hallway was filled with police officers, their flashlights sweeping the ornate corridors. As they handcuffed me, I caught sight of familiar faces watching from the shadows: palace staff, security, and among them, the cold-eyed man who had planned my demise. The look of fury and disbelief on his face almost made me smile. I might be in handcuffs, but for the moment, I was safer than I had been in the palace. As they led me away, the weight of the journal pressed against my side, a reminder of the truths yet to be uncovered. I had thrown myself into the lion's den, but in doing so, I had changed the game. The question now was, had I outsmarted them, or merely postponed the inevitable? The stakes have never been higher as Jane takes her biggest gamble yet. What will the police make of her story? Can she expose the conspiracy before it's too late? And what secrets does the ancient journal hold that are worth killing for? The clock is ticking, and the ravens are circling. Don't miss the next heart-pounding installment of this royal intrigue. Subscribe now to unravel the mystery alongside Jane. The interrogation room at Ravensshire Police Station was a far cry from the opulent halls of Ravenscourt Palace. Stark white walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a single flickering fluorescent light that hummed incessantly. It was designed to break you down, to make you spill your secrets. But I had secrets they couldn't begin to imagine. I sat there, hands cuffed to the table, watching the second hand of the wall clock tick away. It had been hours since my dramatic confession and subsequent arrest. My gamble had bought me time and a measure of safety, but for how long? The door opened and a man entered, tall, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to look right through you. He carried a thick file which he dropped on the table with a resounding thud. Miss Mitchell, he said, taking a seat across from me. I'm Chief Inspector Blackwood. I understand you have quite a story to tell. My heart skipped a beat. Blackwood? Could he be related to Sarah? The coincidence seemed too great, but I couldn't afford to show my surprise. Before we begin, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I need assurances. Protection. He leaned back, studying me. You claim to have evidence of a conspiracy within Ravenscourt Palace. Murder, cover-ups. That's a serious accusation, Miss Mitchell. One that could have grave consequences if proven false. It's all true, I insisted, and I can prove it. But first, I need to know I'm safe. And I hesitated, then pressed on. I need to know about Anna, a maid at the palace. She was going to meet me, to tell me more. I'm afraid they might have gotten to her. Something flickered in the chief inspector's eyes. Concern? Or was it something else? We'll look into it, he said neutrally. Now, why don't you start at the beginning? And so I did. I told him everything: the missing necklace, the hidden passages, the overheard conversations. I told him about Sarah Blackwood's accident and the mysterious raven's eye. With each revelation, I watched his face carefully, looking for any reaction that might betray his allegiances. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. That's quite a tale, Miss Mitchell, he said finally. But you mentioned proof. Where is it? This was the moment of truth. I had to play this carefully. There's a journal, I said, hidden in my quarters at the palace. It details everything, the conspiracy, the Raven's Eye, going back over a century, and you expect me to believe you left this crucial evidence behind? I met his gaze steadily. It was too risky to bring it, but I can tell you exactly where to find it. He nodded slowly. We'll send a team to retrieve it. In the meantime, a sharp knock at the door interrupted him. A young officer entered, his face pale. Sir, there's been a development at the palace. A body's been found. My blood ran cold. Anna, the chief inspector stood abruptly. We'll continue this later, Miss Mitchell. Officer, stay with her. As he left, I caught a glimpse of barely contained fury on his face. But was it directed at the conspirators or at me for complicating things? Hours passed in agonizing silence. The young officer refused to answer any of my questions, leaving me to imagine the worst. Had I signed Anna's death warrant with my actions? It was nearing dawn when the chief inspector returned, looking haggard. The body was identified as Anna Petrova, a senior maid, he said without preamble. Initial findings suggest she fell down a flight of stairs. A tragic accident. It wasn't an accident, I said, my voice shaking with anger and grief. They killed her, just like they killed Sarah Blackwood. You have to enough, he cut me off sharply. Miss Mitchell, we retrieved the journal from your quarters. Except there was no journal. The room was empty, scrubbed clean. It's as if you never lived there. I stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. I stopped, realization dawning. They knew. Somehow, they knew and they got there first. The chief inspector's expression hardened. Or there never was a journal. You spun quite a tale, Miss Mitchell. But without evidence, it's just that, a tale. No, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. It's all true. The hidden passages I can show you. The Raven's Eye, enough, he thundered, slamming his hand on the table. Do you realize the gravity of your situation? You've confessed to stealing a priceless royal artifact. You've accused high-ranking officials of murder and conspiracy. And now, you have no proof to back up your wild claims. I slumped in my chair, the full weight of my situation crashing down on me. They had outmaneuvered me at every turn. The journal was gone, and it was dead, and I was trapped. The chief inspector's voice softened slightly. Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. Your best bet now is to come clean. Tell us where the necklace really is, and maybe we can work out a deal. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that he believed me, that he was on my side. But all I saw was weary skepticism. I don't have the necklace, I said quietly. Everything I told you is true. And if you don't believe me, more people are going to die. He shook his head, disappointment evident in his eyes. I had hoped you'd be reasonable. Officer, take Miss Mitchell to her cell. We'll continue this discussion later. As they led me away, my mind raced. I had taken a gamble and lost spectacularly. The journal was gone, and it was dead, and I was now trapped in a different kind of cage, one with bars and locks, but no less dangerous than Ravenscourt Palace. In my cell, I curled up on the thin mattress, trying to make sense of it all. How had they known about the journal? Who could I possibly trust now? A whisper of movement caught my attention. A piece of paper had been slipped under my cell door. Heart pounding, I retrieved it, unfolding it with trembling hands. In a hurried scrawl, it read, "The ravens still watch. Midnight. Be ready." Hope surged within me. Someone out there still believed me, still wanted to help. But who? And what did they have planned? As I lay there, waiting for midnight and whatever it might bring, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. The Raven's Eye, Sarah Blackwood, the chief inspector's reaction to Anna's death. There was a connection I wasn't seeing. And then it hit me. Blackwood. The chief inspector's name. Sarah's last name. Could it be mere coincidence? I sat up, my mind whirling. If the chief inspector was related to Sarah, did that mean he was part of the conspiracy? Or was he conducting his own secret investigation into her death? Either way, I realized with a chill, I had revealed far too much during our interview. If he was involved, I had just handed him everything he needed to know about what I had uncovered. The distant chiming of a clock brought me back to the present. It was nearing midnight. Whatever was going to happen, it would happen soon. I stood, moving closer to the cell door, every sense on high alert. In the dim light of the corridor, shadows seemed to move and shift. Was it my imagination, or were those footsteps I heard approaching? The lock on my cell door clicked softly. My heart pounded in my chest as the door slowly swung open. A figure stood there, shrouded in shadow. Quickly, a familiar voice whispered, "We don't have much time." As I stepped out of the cell, I knew I was taking yet another leap into the unknown. But what choice did I have? The truth was still out there, hidden in the shadows of Ravenscourt Palace, and I was the only one who could bring it to light. The question was, at what cost? The game has changed, and Jane finds herself caught in a web far more complex than she ever imagined. Who is her mysterious rescuer? Can she uncover the truth about the Raven's Eye before it's too late? And what role does Chief Inspector Blackwood play in this intricate dance of secrets and lies? The countdown to midnight has begun. Subscribe now to join Jane on her daring escape and the hunt for answers that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The corridors of Ravenshire Police Station were a maze of shadows and flickering fluorescent lights. My mysterious rescuer led the way, moving with a surety that spoke of intimate knowledge of the building's layout. I followed close behind, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would give us away. "Who are you?" I whispered as we ducked into an alcove to avoid a passing guard. The figure turned, and in the dim light, I caught a glimpse of a face I never expected to see again. "Mr. Peters, the security guard from Ravenscourt Palace." "You?" I gasped. "But why not here?" he hissed, cutting me off. "We're not safe yet." Questions burned on my tongue, but I bit them back. He was right. Explanations could wait until we were free. We made our way through a series of back corridors and finally emerged into the cool night air through a service entrance. A nondescript car idled nearby, its engine a low purr in the quiet street. "Get in," Mr. Peters said, opening the rear door. As I slid into the back seat, my eyes widened in shock. Sitting in the driver's seat, her face tense with worry, was Mrs. Harrison, the head housekeeper of Ravenscourt Palace. "Drive," Mr. Peters commanded as he got in beside me. Mrs. Harrison nodded and pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the sparse late-night traffic. "I don't understand," I said, looking between them. "You're part of this? But I thought that we were your enemies," Mrs. Harrison finished, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "We've been protecting you, Jane. Or trying to, at least. But the questioning, the accusations, all part of the act," Mr. Peters explained. "We had to make it convincing. The walls have ears in Ravenscourt, and not all of them belong to the crown." My mind reeled, trying to process this new information. "Anna," I said suddenly, remembering the tragedy that had unfolded. "Did you know we were too late?" Mrs. Harrison said, her voice thick with regret. "By the time we realized she was going to contact you, it was already done." "Who's behind all this?" I asked. "What is the Raven's Eye really?" Mr. Peters and Mrs. Harrison exchanged a loaded glance. "It's not a what," Mr. Peters said slowly. "It's a who. The Raven's Eye is a person, the true power behind the throne. They've been pulling the strings for centuries, using the monarchy as a front. But that's impossible," I stammered. "Is it?" Mrs. Harrison asked. "Think about it, Jane. The longevity of the British monarchy, its survival through wars and revolutions. Did you never wonder how they managed it?" As my mind grappled with this revelation, a more pressing question surfaced. "Where are we going?" "Back to Ravenscourt," Mr. Peters said. "What?" "But that's the last place they'll expect you to go," he finished. "And the only place where we can end this, once and for all." As the familiar silhouette of Ravenscourt Palace loomed before us, I felt a chill run down my spine. This place, once my workplace, now felt like a beast waiting to devour me. We entered through a service entrance, the corridors eerily quiet at this late hour. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every creaking floorboard a harbinger of discovery. The journal, I whispered as we moved swiftly through the servants' quarters. They took it from my room. Not quite, Mrs. Harrison said with a hint of a smile. She led us to her own quarters and after checking that the coast was clear, retrieved a familiar leather-bound book from a hidden compartment in her wardrobe. You, I gasped. But how? I've been at Ravenscourt for decades, dear, she said, handing me the journal. I know every hiding place in this palace. As I clutched the journal to my chest, relief washing over me, a thought struck me. Chief Inspector Blackwood, I said. Is he part of this? Is he related to Sarah? Mr. Peters' expression darkened. Jonathan Blackwood is Sarah's brother. He's been investigating her death for years, trying to uncover the truth, but he's walking a dangerous line. We need to move, Mrs. Harrison interrupted, her voice urgent. The Emerald Room. It's time you learned the full truth, Jane. As we made our way through the palace, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. The Emerald Room, the very place mentioned in the note I had found. Was this all part of some elaborate setup? We reached the ornate doors of the Emerald Room, their jade inlays gleaming in the dim light. Mrs. Harrison produced a key from her pocket, its intricate design unlike any I had seen before. Whatever happens, Mr. Peters said gravely, remember the truth is in the eye of the raven. With that cryptic warning, Mrs. Harrison turned the key. The doors swung open silently, revealing a room that took my breath away. The Emerald Room lived up to its name. Walls adorned with priceless jade and malachite gleamed in the soft light of crystal chandeliers. But it was what stood at the center of the room that drew my attention, a life-size statue of a raven, its eye socket empty, surrounded by a circle of ancient-looking symbols etched into the floor. The raven's eye, I breathed. Not quite, a voice said from the shadows, but close. My blood ran cold as a figure stepped into the light. The cold-eyed man who had questioned me, who I had overheard plotting my demise. You, I gasped, stumbling backward. But to my shock, Mr. Peters and Mrs. Harrison didn't react with alarm. Instead, they bowed their heads slightly. Your Majesty, Mrs. Harrison said softly. My mind reeled. Your Majesty? But that would mean allow me to properly introduce myself, the man said, his cold demeanor melting into something more regal, more commanding. I am King Edward, the true monarch of Britain, and you, Jane Mitchell, have stumbled into a game that has been played for centuries. I looked between him and my supposed allies, confusion and betrayal warring within me. I don't understand. You were going to kill me. You killed Anna, a necessary deception, the king said, his voice tinged with regret. We had to be certain of your loyalties, of your determination to uncover the truth. Anna's death was regrettable, but unavoidable. She knew too much and was going to expose everything before we were ready. Ready for what? I demanded. To reclaim what was stolen from us, he replied. The true raven's eye, he gestured to the statue. This is merely a decoy. The real raven's eye is a gem of immense power and historical significance. It was stolen centuries ago by those who sought to control the monarchy from the shadows. They've been using it to manipulate events, to ensure their chosen puppets sit on the throne while the true heirs are kept in hiding. The missing necklace, I said, realization dawning. It wasn't just a theft. It was a message, the king finished. A warning that they know we're close to finding the true eye. Your discovery of the hidden passages forced our hand. We had to accelerate our plans. My head spun with the implications. Everything I thought I knew had been turned on its head. But one question still burned in my mind. Sarah Blackwood, I said. What happened to her? A pained expression crossed the king's face. Sarah was my daughter, he said softly. She discovered the truth on her own and tried to expose it. But she underestimated our enemies. Her accident was a message, a reminder of the power they still hold. And Chief Inspector Blackwood? My son, the king confirmed. He doesn't know the full truth for his own protection, but he suspects enough to be dangerous. As I struggled to process this flood of revelations, a slow clap echoed through the room. We all turned to see a figure emerging from a hidden panel in the wall. Bravo, Chief Inspector Blackwood said, his expression a mix of fury and triumph. What a lovely story. It's almost a shame to bring it to an end. He raised a gun, its barrel gleaming in the chandelier light. Now, he said, his voice cold, who wants to tell me what really happened to my sister? The tension in the room was palpable as we stood frozen, the barrel of the chief inspector's gun sweeping between us. The truth hung in the air, a tangible thing, waiting to be grasped or shattered. Jonathan, the king said, his voice laden with a weariness that seemed to age him before our eyes. Son, don't call me that, Blackwood snarled. You lost that right when you let them kill Sarah. I watched the exchange, my mind racing. The journal pressed against my side, a silent reminder of the truths yet to be revealed. In that moment, I realized that the fate of not just the monarchy, but perhaps the entire nation, rested on what happened in this room. Inspector, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, there's something you need to see. All eyes turned to me as I slowly reached for the journal. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. The game had changed, and the final moves were about to be played. The pieces are falling into place, but the board is more complex than anyone realized. As dawn approaches, Jane finds herself at the center of a centuries-old power struggle. Will the truth about the Raven's Eye finally be revealed? Can she navigate the tangled web of loyalty and betrayal to uncover the real puppet masters? And what price will be paid for the final revelation? The climax is approaching, and every second counts. Don't miss the explosive conclusion to this royal intrigue. Subscribe now to witness the unraveling of a conspiracy that could reshape history. The Emerald Room seemed to hold its breath as I slowly retrieved the journal from my jacket. Chief Inspector Blackwood's gun remained trained on us, his eyes darting between my hands and the faces of those around me. Careful, he warned, his voice taut with tension. No sudden moves. I nodded, my heart pounding as I opened the journal to a page I had marked earlier. Inspector, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, before you do anything, you need to read this. It's about Sarah. At the mention of his sister's name, a flicker of pain crossed Blackwood's face. What could that possibly tell me that I don't already know? The truth, I said simply. Sarah wrote this entry the night before she died, keeping his gun trained on the others. Blackwood approached me cautiously. I held out the journal, and he took it with his free hand, eyes scanning the page rapidly. As he read, his expression changed from skepticism to shock, then to a grief so profound it was almost tangible. This can't be true, he whispered. It is, the king said softly. Sarah discovered the truth, but she also realized the danger of exposing it too soon. Her death wasn't just a murder, Jonathan. It was a sacrifice. Blackwood looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. She knew? She chose this? I nodded, remembering the words I had read in Sarah's elegant handwriting. She wrote that the Raven's Eye was too powerful to fall into the wrong hands. She believed that by staging her own death, she could buy time for the true heir to prepare. The true heir, Blackwood repeated, his gaze shifting to the king. You? The king nodded solemnly. I am the last of a line that has been hidden for centuries, Jonathan. The puppet monarchs you see in the media, the ones who wave from balconies and christen ships, they're just that, puppets. The real power has always been in the shadows, wielded by those who possess the Raven's Eye. But why? Blackwood demanded, his gun lowering slightly as confusion overtook anger. Why maintain this charade? Balance, Mrs. Harrison interjected. The Raven's Eye grants immense power, but it also demands sacrifice. The false monarchy keeps the public's attention, while the true rulers work to maintain the delicate balance of power in the world. We've been fighting a silent war, Mr. Peters added, against those who would use the Eye's power for their own gain. The kind of people who wouldn't hesitate to reshape the world in their image, regardless of the cost. As they spoke, I noticed a change in the air. The symbols etched into the floor around the raven statue began to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. It's responding to the truth, the king said, noticing my gaze. The eye is more than just a gem, Jane. It's a conduit for a power older than history itself, a power that can only be wielded by one who understands the weight of the crown, the true weight, not just the gilded facade. Blackwood's gun clattered to the floor as the full impact of the revelations hit him. All this time, he murmured, Sarah knew. She was protecting. All of this, the king stepped forward, placing a hand on Blackwood's shoulder. She was protecting you, son. And now, we need your help to finish what she started. Suddenly, a slow clap echoed through the room. We all turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, the man I recognized as the senior butler who had been speaking with the king earlier. Oh, bravo, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What a touching family reunion. It's almost a shame to interrupt, Hastings, the king growled. I should have known. The butler Hastings smiled coldly. Yes, you should have. Did you really think we wouldn't have contingencies in place? That we'd let you simply waltz in and reclaim the eye? With a sharp gesture, more figures melted out of the shadows, palace staff and guards I recognized, all with weapons trained on us. You see, Hastings continued, the beauty of having puppets is that no one looks too closely at the strings, or the hands that pull them. As he spoke, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, glowing object, a gem that pulsed with an otherworldly light. The raven's eye. The symbols on the floor flared brightly in response, and I felt a wave of energy wash over me, leaving my skin tingling. At last, Hastings breathed, gazing at the gem with naked hunger. With this, we can reshape the world. No more hiding in the shadows. No more puppet monarchs. We'll rule openly, as we always should have. You fool, the king spat. You have no idea of the forces you're dealing with. The eye isn't meant to dominate, it's meant to balance, Hastings laughed. Balance? What use is balance when you can have absolute power? As he raised the eye triumphantly, I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge. Before I could second-guess myself, I darted forward and snatched the journal from Blackwood's slack grip. Jane, no, Mrs. Harrison cried, but it was too late. I threw the journal with all my might. It struck Hastings' hand, sending the raven's eye flying. The gem arced through the air, glowing brighter with each passing second. Time seemed to slow. I saw the look of horror on Hastings' face, the desperation in the king's eyes, the dawning realization in Blackwood's expression. The eye fell, heading straight for the empty socket of the raven statue. Stop it! Hastings screamed, lunging forward, but he was too late. The gem slotted perfectly into place, and a blinding light exploded from the statue. I felt a force like a tidal wave slam into me, lifting me off my feet. Voices cried out in shock and pain. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. And then, silence. When my vision cleared, I found myself sprawled on the floor. Around me, others were slowly stirring, groaning in confusion. The raven statue stood unchanged, but the eye in its socket now gleamed with a soft, pulsing light. The symbols on the floor glowed in rhythm with it, creating a hypnotic pattern. It's done, the king said, his voice filled with awe and relief. The eye has chosen. Hastings staggered to his feet, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. No, he snarled, reaching for the statue. But as his fingers neared the eye, a spark of energy lashed out, sending him reeling back with a cry of pain. You see, Hastings? The king said, rising slowly. The eye chooses its wielder. It can't be taken by force or deceit. It must be earned. As if in response to his words, the light from the eye intensified. A beam shot out, sweeping across the room before settling on me. I gasped as warmth flooded through me, images and knowledge pouring into my mind faster than I could process. Centuries of history, secrets long buried, the delicate balance of power that kept the world turning, all of it laid bare in an instant. Impossible, Hastings breathed. No, Mrs. Harrison said, a smile spreading across her face. It's perfect. The king stepped forward, offering me his hand. The eye has chosen, Jane. It sees in you the qualities needed to bear this burden, the compassion to care for all, the courage to face the darkness, and the wisdom to know when to act and when to wait. As I took his hand and rose, I felt the weight of destiny settling onto my shoulders. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now," the king said, "we begin anew. The old shadows are gone, but new challenges will arise. The world must be guided, but never controlled. It's a delicate balance, one that you must learn to maintain." Blackwood stepped forward, holstering his gun. "I'll help," he said firmly. "For Sarah, for the truth." One by one, the others in the room knelt, even Hastings. The reluctance was clear on his face. As dawn's first light began to filter through the windows, I realized that this was just the beginning. The ravens I pulsed gently, a constant reminder of the power and responsibility I now held. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers I could only begin to imagine. But as I looked at the faces around me, allies old and new, united in purpose, I knew that I wouldn't face it alone. The game had changed, the shadows had been dispelled, and in the light of a new day, the true reign of the Raven's Eye was about to begin. And so, dear readers, our journey through the shadowed halls of Ravenscourt Palace comes to an end. But for Jane, this is just the beginning of an even greater adventure. What challenges await as she learns to wield the power of the Raven's Eye? How will she reshape the balance of power in a world on the brink of change? The story may be over, but the legacy of the Raven's Eye lives on. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey into the heart of a royal conspiracy. May the shadows always hide more truths than dangers in your own adventures.